When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Welcome back to I Want That Too, the podcast where Disney merch meets Disney history. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and as always, I'm joined by the lovely Lauren Hersey. And how are we this evening, Lauren?
Busy, a lot like you. I've been doing the Lord's work over here. I went to Bath and Body and rope dropped Mandalorian and Grogu today, and saw Devil Wears Prada. So, we've got a lot to talk about before I leave for the beach, where I'm going to get to go to a Disney store.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, how are you?
I am reasonably well. I did want to follow up on something you brought up on I want to say last week's I Want That Too, and you had mentioned the Jim Henson, the Little Golden Book of, again, a longtime Henson fan, and so I had to chase this down, and they did an okay job. There's no getting around the fact that we lose Jim in May of 1990. In fact, this week will be, dear Lord, really 36 years since we lost him? Wow. But yeah, on the 16th, later this week. But
what don't you like about it? You don't seem enthused.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, it is what it is. It's a little golden book, and it needs to be positive and upbeat, and that's the thing. You know, Jim Henson's career was full of challenges, and I don't. You know, again, when you're taking somebody's life story and boiling it down to, how many pages is this? 20? And that's the other thing. If you look at the back of this, it's like, this is part of a series. I mean, they've got Steven Spielberg, Cal Burnett, Dick Van Dyke. That one I actually tried to chase down today. Though, the other one, and Drew Taylor is going to be so mad at me because I got this one. But Toy Story 5.
There's a golden book, a little golden book for Toy Story 5?
There's a little golden book for Toy Story 5. And yes, I spoiled the story for myself. But on the other hand, I can now say, oh, okay, I think that works as a fifth installment of the Toy Story series. And it's definitely more of a Jessie story, and that's all I'm allowed to say at this time.
Okay, well, so that makes perfect sense, though, because I didn't buy the golden book, so I don't know how the story plays out. But yesterday was Mother's Day. We're recording this on Monday, May 11th. And my husband took me to Cracker Barrel, and we went to Five Below. And they had a ton of Toy Story 5 merch. I'll have to send you some of the photos or videos. But largely, it was, I'd say, 75% Jessie.
And there is a reason for that, but again, we'll revisit that in like a month.
I still don't know that, is there something, so they had almost like the little Funko Pop type of characters. They were all the little aliens, but there was one that was dressed up like Lotso. There was one that was dressed up like Sully from Monsters, Inc. And there was another one. I'm like, why are all these little aliens dressed up? Did they reference anything like that?
Not really. That is more of a case of just taking the little green aliens who have been part of the Toy Story films since the very first movie came out in, dear Lord, 1995. But yeah, that's them just sort of paying tribute to all of the other Pixar films that are out there. But no, they don't show up in disguise in this movie. Just saying.
Okay. Just making sure, because I was like, that's the only other odd thing. But like, Wall of Jessie, so it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
But we have a lot to get into today, and we'll talk more about my outings with the Star Wars and Devil Wears Prada, and then we're gonna switch gears and talk about what came out on the earnings call and how it could impact how you spend money with the company. And do we have a 2-part feature this week, sir?
We're going to get started this week on the tale of Go.com. I bring this up, as I was mentioning to Lauren, given what happened with Disney's billion-dollar AI effort and, how that crashed and burned. I thought it might be interesting to take a look at Disney's first run at getting into the internet and how that kind of went sideways as well. But we'll get to that story later on.
Yeah, I did have to say, Jim, did we acknowledge it's 99 episodes today?
Can you believe it? 99. Really? Wow.
I feel like an old lady after 99 episodes. No, but for real. Coming up next week, 100th episode. So thanks for being on this ride with us. If you like what you're listening to and you want to weigh in, leaving us a quick rating or review would mean a lot. But on that note, Jim, why don't we thank our sponsor and get into it?
Okay, and of course, our sponsor is Unlock Magic, your go-to source for great deals on Disney and Universal tickets. If a trip down to Florida to check out the parks there is on your radar for 2026, head to unlockmagic.com and let their team help you make your next vacation to Central Florida just a little bit more magical. So, we were just talking about Toy Story 5. And our first news item this week actually has to do with the promotion of that film. Is that correct?
Yes. Like I said, I rope dropped it this morning because I was really excited when I heard about the announcement about 2 weeks ago. And on the promotion, it said there was an Ice Planet candle. And I'm like, I wonder what that smells like. So I have to say I was surprised and somewhat disappointed when I went there this morning. And I'm there to smell the candles, right? And they're for men. They're just for men, Jim. So there's 2 lines in the store. There's a bounty hunter smell, and there's it's a Grogu smell, but it's called the Force Flow. And they're for men. So I obviously was asking the employee that was helping me out, what the deal with that was. And, my marketing brain is going off and saying, Bath and Body Works, that's probably largely women buying this stuff. It's a big risk, I'd say, to release a line that's just for men. And I asked the question. I popped into the location at our local mall yesterday, and both employees said that this was a massive undertaking for the company. They went above and beyond for this. And so when I asked, if this was really a risk, the lady today said that with this being the first line they've ever done, that Father's Day will make or break the sales of this. Do you have thoughts on this partnership? Because princesses slayed all day, villains amazing. I don't know.
I guess what genuinely intrigues me about this is that, well, I was just in CVS earlier this week, and again had been, you and I, again, spend entirely too much time in Target, and they had their Toy Story 5, toys out. But what was interesting when I went to CVS, what immediately caught my eye was a Toy Story 5 end cap there, but it was for Dr. Squatch soap. And it's just the notion of, all right, so Bed and Bath, are doing The Mandalorian, where Dr. Squatch is doing,
Sounds like they got their wires crossed.
Yeah, just kind of interesting. They had 3 different, Toy Story related soaps there. They had Cosmic Captain, which was Buzz Lightyear themed. They had Howdy Hero, that was Woody, and then Cowgirl Courage, which was Jessie themed. So again, think about it. We just talked last week about the decision that was made to the effect of, okay, what is it? Mandalorian is at Burger King, whereas Toy Story 5 is at McDonald's.
And Jim, that absolutely blew up on social media. Had like 80,000 views or something. Like everybody wanted to weigh in and know more about how Burger King got that deal. And like I went and I got the bounty meal and like the whole 9. But you're exactly right. And I mean, on next week's episode, I have a food one for Toy Story. Like, what is going on?
Well, again, the whole notion is whatever gets your thing in the spotlight is ultimately, what Disney is looking to do right now. And I guess I'm kind of sad to hear that about, the Mandalorian Grogu, and you were underwhelmed, right? Because it was strictly for men, right?
I mean, I just thought there'd be something for me. But listen, I didn't leave empty-handed, though. And if you want like a full deep dive on everything they had over on Diz and Hers on TikTok, I walk through everything. But I did buy Eric the Force Flow 3-in-1 hair, face, body wash. And I mean, it smells fine, but the lady was trying to sell me on why I should use it. And I'm like, I don't think so. But Jim, wait till you see this. I went for this. So this is the pocket back. So like the little hand sanitizer holder. And you can see Mandalorian is holding Grogu. But listen to the sounds that it makes. I'm going to hold it up to the mic.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, you get the gist. So anyways, I had to have that as I just finished up The Mandalorian last night. So if you are a guy listening, this might be up your alley, or ladies, maybe getting the men in your life something nice for Father's Day.
Well, okay. And I guess I do get the whole pushing Mandalorian and Grogu for Father's Day. I mean, and again, you having just completed The Mandalorian, over on Disney Plus, you get that too, right? It is a father-son story. So,
yes, I get it.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, it's a missed opportunity, but at the same time,
women like Grogu too. I'm just saying.
They do. All right. You're not
all
wrong.
right, but switching gears, now let's talk about Mother's Day a little bit. So I think I was a good daughter, and I took my mom to see The Devil Wears Prada 2 this last week for Mother's Day. And we all know that it's, I mean, these numbers might even be outdated, but did it open at $77 million, like domestically? It was bigger than they had anticipated.
I mean, and in fact, the story this past weekend was, and Drew and I talk a lot about this on Fine Tuning, but basically, when it's the second weekend that your movie is out in theaters, and particularly if you've had a strong opening weekend, you sort of have to resign yourself to, okay, business is going to fall off considerably, and what you're hoping is that it doesn't fall off more than 70%, to the effect of, because that then indicates, okay, everybody who wanted to see your movie has already seen it, and this is not a good thing. You want to have, as they say in the industry, legs. And what sort of startled people in the business this past weekend was that Devil Wears Prada had such a good second weekend in theaters. First of all, it actually outgrossed the new film, another sequel, by the way, Mortal Kombat 2. But more to the point, Lauren, business for Devil Wears Prada 2 only fell off by 43%. And what that means is people went and liked the movie so much, some of them came back. And that just doesn't happen in today's movie-going world. The notion of, I have to go back and see that. I had such a good time. So.
And I feel that way. Like Lainey went and saw Michael Jackson while my mom and I went and saw The Devil Wears Prada. But she mentioned wanting to go, and I could totally see it again and enjoy it just as much. But the news around this, we talked about a few weeks ago, them selling like the purse popcorn bucket in the theater and like all of this additional merch and bundling happening to get you into the theater. But what I thought was interesting after going and seeing the movie, and I was just curious if they put any merch out for The Devil Wears Prada 2, because you typically don't see the volume of merch for a film like this versus, say, animation or Toy Story, Star Wars, or, those big Moana movies. But I was really surprised, and I have a couple questions for you, that they did roll out a good bit of merch, and some of it oddly, I guess it plays to the movie theme, but it's kind of high fashion. So they have a lot of like trendy looking clothes like Walmart and Old Navy and Lulu's. It says that they're serving up style, whatever that means. And they had like a cute shirt with the sayings on it. But my question for you, Jim, is if you look here, little people, like Fisher Price little people, they have a line of the Devil Wears Prada 2 characters. Like, are these things now being marketed towards adults? Like, what child would want that?
Well, realistically, the person that's springing for The Devil Wears Prada 2, little people, that's more something you put on your desk at work. That's something your coworkers are like, oh, how cool! A teeny tiny little Stanley Tucci. It's leaning into that nostalgia, but at the same time understanding that it's a nostalgic adult that's buying this. Nobody is taking, The Devil Wears Prada 2 little people home with the hope that it then encourages. In fact, that's, not to give anything away about, the storyline of the movie, but when you think about what the overarching tale of that film is, and what's happening in publishing and how it's not journalism anymore, it's content creation. That's the interesting thing, that there's kind of a celebration of a dying art form in that movie, but at the same time it's wrapped up in a celebration of fashion. So
and it was I have to say it was a really good movie. But my second and last question about this is, we're in this era of, Disney tapping into previously successful IP. We're getting all the live action remakes. And this movie bringing back Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, like the whole original cast. Like, as a culture, are we just craving like things from a simpler time? And do you think that we're going to see more things like this in the future, and then more like adult skewing merch for movies like this versus just the animated ones?
Well, it's so interesting you bring this up, because in fact, Drew and I mentioned this in passing, but you did see the announcement this past week about Hocus Pocus 3, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's official. Josh
Bette
tomorrow.
Midler's getting her wish. Didn't she say, hurry up if you want me?
There we go. And what's interesting is you got to remember the Hocus Pocus 2 debuted on Disney Plus back in September of 2022, and for a time was the most watched film ever on that streaming service. But what's especially fascinating about what Disney has decided to do, Lauren, is that Hocus Pocus 3, evidently they've got a script. They're prepping now, and it's a question of can they get their things in motion fast enough for 2027, or is this 2028? But it's going out into theaters. It's not. In fact, and supposedly this decision was made on the back of how well The Devil Wears Prada 2 did.
Shut up.
Just the notion of, so many, and that's the other thing. Disney had all this research in hand of, who went out to go see Devil Wears Prada 2 over the opening weekend. And it was, predominantly female audience, and they brought friends. And the notion was that, what's going to get them back in theaters? And it's like, well, another largely female-driven film. And, think about it. Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy. But that was literally announced like 2 days after Disney had the Devil Wears Prada numbers in hand. And it's like, okay, what else can we do? And more to the point, what would lend itself to doing all sorts of fun merchandise? And,
gosh.
There we go. Hocus Pocus 3.
How about that? So excited. Mm-hmm. All right. Last up on the agenda, this is kind of circling back to something we talked about a couple weeks ago, because now we've got some clarity. Mm-hmm. I listened to Disney's earnings call a couple days ago, and there were a couple little nuggets that I thought I wanted to circle back on.
Okay.
Did you happen to, have you heard any rumblings about how that call went?
The interesting thing is that, Josh did what he had to. Just that Wall Street came away and it's like, okay. They weren't particularly excited, but they weren't upset. It's like, all right, the new Disney CEO is kind of like the old Disney CEO. He's staying the course and, said things that Wall Street wanted to hear. But yeah, this super app.
That's what I wanted to circle back around on. First of all, I have to say, good on you, Josh. If you're not familiar with how the earnings calls work, basically they come on at the top of the call and they give their prepared remarks, and then they open up for questions. And so I thought the juicy stuff kind of came when the questions started flowing, and I think Josh handled himself, the way that he should. But he kept reiterating their 3 priorities. I actually wrote them down on this Post-it. Creative excellence, more connection to the fan experience, and tech as an accelerant. And that's what everything kind of kept going back to. But I wanted to read between the lines, because he was asked specifically, no, they didn't say super app, but at first it came up because of the partnership with Epic Games and creating this immersive experience within Fortnite, and how that connects to the overall customer experience. So the way that Josh explained this is that the parks are the physical experience for Disney, but what they're envisioning is also a hub and spokes, layout for their digital footprint. And so they envision that Disney Plus will be the digital center, and everything will be spokes off of Disney Plus. So they said that, you can only have a successful hub and spoke model, and Fortnite is an extremely important spoke for them because of the younger demographic, and then being able to connect that within Disney Plus. They also said that they have plans obviously they talked a lot about short form video, user generated content.
Not to interrupt here, but I will interrupt.
Please interrupt.
You mentioned short form video, and we were just talking Mandalorian and Grogu soap. But if you go over to Disney Plus, what's fascinating is right now, for example, there is a Mandalorian and Grogu sneak peek, and it's 4 short form videos that give you a taste of the world and the characters and that sort of thing. I mean, so just to be clear here, what Josh is talking about, it's not theoretical. The company is doing it already, but again, you got to walk before you can run. If you want to get a taste of what potentially this is going to be like, head on over to Disney Plus and look for the Mandalorian Grogu stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to see more of that. It sounds like that was a big focus for them, obviously, like to streamline operations and everything. But the way that they explained it was that there are a lot of park fans that are in there watching Disney Plus, but Disney Plus has more of an audience than really anything else that don't go to the parks. And so to be able to connect all of their things under this one universe like Apple is really attractive to them for synergies. That's like a very that's a very corporate word, but synergies. And the other thing he said I did want to mention real quick, and it was like a literal blip, but it was asked about AI, and he started to talk about Parks AI. So, but he didn't want to get ahead of himself in that. But it sounds like they're going to start using more natural language, like that kind of stuff, to make it easier to plan and execute on a Disney vacation, which I think could be really good. And they've seen massive success with the customized, like ESPNU or whatever it's called, where you're getting your customized sports feed. So more of that to come. But all of this is what got me thinking about go.com to begin with in the history there.
Yeah, and again, when we get back from this break, the irony here is that Lauren has to go on her trip. So I'll be doing this story solo, but she'll come back in at the end of the show. But we're about to get started on the history of Disney getting into the internet and how that didn't necessarily go the way the mouse wanted. But before we do that, there's this.
Looking for a protein shake that tastes as good as it performs? Meet Rockin' Protein Max. Packed with 50 grams of fuel, it'll help you keep up when your day won't slow down. And because it's always creamy and never chalky, every sip tastes great. Even better, it's lactose-free and has 0 added sugar. It's not every day you find a protein shake you actually want to finish. Catch Rockin' Protein in the dairy cooler at a store near you. Rockin' Protein and Shamrock Farms are registered trademarks of Shamrock Foods Company.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
And we're back, and per usual, when it comes to the features around here, I follow Ms. Hersey's lead, and she, this week, seemed very interested in go.com, which, again, if you spend any time on the Disney-related websites, you see that name come up quite a bit. And she wanted to know more about that aspect of the company. And for me, well, go.com is an interesting story. And I couldn't help but thinking about go.com recently when, do you remember when Disney made that $1 billion equity investment in OpenAI? Was announced with great fanfare in December of 2025. And, they were, Disney was going to be, become this major partner, and they were going to give them license to over 200 character assets, Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, that users were then going to be allowed to make short-form AI videos with. And again, that was announced December of 2025. By March of 2026, that deal got canceled. That OpenAI decided it no longer wanted to be working on its Sora app. And I mean, it made me think that if you look back over the history of the Disney company, I mean, yeah, everybody thinks of Disney as this amazing tech-driven company, and that's understandable. You go to the theme parks and see things like audio animatronics, but a hard reality is that there have been a couple of times in Disney history where tech has just not worked for the mouse. And, it makes me think back to December 37. Snow White had just had its Hollywood premiere. It would go wide in theaters February of the following year, 1938. And this tidal wave of money just came pouring into Disney Studios. And you have to understand that Snow White had been made up there at 2719 Hyperion Avenue, and look, everybody knows the cute little neon sign that was over that version of the Disney Studios at that time. But the reality is that Disney Studios, at least when it was up in the Silver Lake area of Los Angeles, was this crummy, cobbled together collection of buildings. And that had been the company's home since, 1926 through 1940. And Walt wanted a modern, up-to-date place to make animated shorts and features. So he and his brother went over to Burbank. They found a 51-acre piece of land, and in August of 1938, and again, remember, Snow White had only just gone wide in February of that time, and again, that tidal wave of money came rolling in. They put a $10,000 deposit down on this piece of land and began building a state-of-the-art studio there. And this was purpose-built for the production of animation, and, there were all sorts of innovations. For example, there was a tunnel system under the studio so that when, for example, they were carrying those giant pieces of glass with paint on them to use for the multiplane camera, they didn't have to take them outdoors and potentially have them get rained on or anything like that. But anyway, they build this state. Kem Weber rides herd on a lot of this, but move-in to the new studio in Burbank begins in December of 39. It is completed by May of 1940. And, timing is everything in life. And what's kind of interesting is September of 1939, the previous year, World War II had begun. That was when Germany invaded Poland. And, as everybody's moving over from Hyperion Avenue to the new thing in Burbank, European film markets are drying up. And anyway, February of 1940, Pinocchio comes out. But remember, with Pinocchio, there was 6 months of work done on the film before they stopped production, threw all that out, and started over again. So depending on who you talk to at the studio, Pinocchio cost $2.3 or maybe as high as $2.6 million, which isn't all that great when you only make $1.9 million in ticket sales. But Walt and Roy did have a card they could play, and that was taking the Disney company public in April of 1940. They issued 155,000 shares of stock, which, by the way, at their height, were selling back then for $25 a piece. And that raised $4 million, and it, came in at a really good time because they're working on Fantasia. And remember Fantasia, and again, if you want to talk about Disney and tech that doesn't work, this is where the Fantasound system came in, the early version of stereo. And Fantasia cost $2,280,000 to make, and fully a quarter of that amount of money was spent on this new stereo sound system for theaters. But here's the thing: it was very expensive in 1940 money. $85,000 per theater. And by the way, it took 2 weeks to install. And so in the end, only 13 theaters in the entire United States sprang for the Fantasound system. And Fantasia comes out in theaters November of 1940 and only sells $1.4 million worth of tickets. So that loses money. So Pinocchio and Fantasia lose money right back to back in 1940. And to further make this kind of Walt season in hell, May of 1941 is when the infamous animators strike starts. And the supreme irony of this is that they had spent the winter of 1940 and 41 shooting The Reluctant Dragon on the Disney lot, which is that mix of live action animation that showed off the wonderful brand new 51-acre complex that Disney had built in Burbank for the production of animation. And there are famous photos of the strikers out in front of the theater where they're having the Hollywood premiere. But anyway, by September 41, the Disney strike is over. October of 41 is when Dumbo arrives. And but just weeks after that is when Pearl Harbor happens. And the day after Pearl Harbor is when the Army Air Corps moves into the Disney lot with I want to say 500 troops and artillery, because their job is to protect the Lockheed plant that's just up the street from Disney, which is considered crucial for the war effort. So again, important to understand here that there are just 4 years between Snow White's Hollywood premiere and the Army Air Corps moving into the Disney lot. And Roy O. Disney, Walt's brother, always argued that if they had just stayed up on Hyperion Avenue, in that neighborhood of Silver Lake with the crummy buildings, more to the point, if they hadn't spent all that money designing Fantasound, the company would have been in much better shape to survive World War II. Walt, on the other hand, he argued that, well, look, our studio has a tradition of embracing new tech, synchronized sound cartoons, using Technicolor, or even just deciding to do the first ever feature-length animated cartoon. And that's what made Disney stand out. All right, so if we now jump ahead like 8 years, Disney has survived the war. It's pretty lean times, though, and they're trying to decide. It's been a while since they've done a really for real full length animated feature. They've done what they called program films, Make Mine Music, Saludos Amigos, The Three Caballeros, which are sort of groupings of short segments. And they're trying to decide, if we're going to do a really for real feature, we have these a bunch of projects that we stopped working on when the war broke out. Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, and Cinderella. But which one should we do as our return to form, our first feature length? And interesting thing is Walt himself wasn't all that keen on doing Cinderella, because his argument is like, look, we already did this. That's Snow White. If anything, look at the mice. They're the dwarves, only tiny. But in the end, the folks at the studio were looking hard at Peter Pan and Alice, and Cinderella was, I'm being polite here, folks, it was the cheapest one of the pile to make. It would be the easiest one to get out the door. So they rolled the dice in 1948. By March of 1950, Cinderella's in theaters, and thank God it's a smash hit. But Walt again looks at it, and it's like all Walt can see is where they cut the corners. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's, for example, the "Sing Sweet Nightingale" number in that, where they did the soap bubbles with infinite, reflections of Cinderella. Walt was proud of that part of the movie. Likewise, the fairy godmother scenes. But for him, it was like, we did this. But at the same time, he recognized, wow, princess movies make money, so maybe we should do another one, especially since I'm thinking of building this thing in Anaheim. It's by November of 1950, they are already working on Sleeping Beauty. But this time around, Walt wants to make a good princess movie, something that has, that's ambitious, that embraces the new tech that's sweeping Hollywood at this time. And this is when widescreen is coming in. So Walt makes the decision that what's going to make Sleeping Beauty different from Snow White and Cinderella is it's effectively going to be a moving tapestry. This is when he makes the decision to make this animated feature in Super Technorama 70, a really widescreen format. And as I mentioned, production begins November of 1950. This film was originally supposed to be in theaters in 55, folks. Maybe 56. It was definitely going to follow Lady and the Tramp. But here's the thing. They started with the Briar Rose meets Prince Philip scene. And that all by itself, because of the wide format coupled with the stylization, the building off of Ivid Earle's design for the film, that scene all by itself took 6 months to animate. And in the end, they just recognized, wow, we're never going to make 55, 56. So by April of 54, they had pushed Sleeping Beauty to a February of 57 release, which then got pushed to a Christmas of 57 release. And further on, when it became apparent that we're still way behind schedule. Did we say that? We meant Christmas of 58. And then finally, it's like, all right, we're going to miss that, but let's put it in theaters in January of 59. In the end, because of deciding to go with the moving tapestry, Super Technorama 70 millimeter format, film cost $6 million to make, did not cover its production cost. In fact, it lost so much money that year, the Walt Disney Production had to declare a loss. And by the way, that was the first time that Disney had to do that since Disneyland had opened in 1955. And 6 months after this, there was a massive layoff at Feature Animation. This division of the company goes from 500 employees down to 60. And the question then becomes, can Disney Studios still make full-length animated features with so few people on staff? And it's kind of ironic here that it was actually new tech, xerography, a new way of transferring drawings to pieces of acetate that ultimately made it possible for Disney Feature Animation to move forward. And we get 101 Dalmatians in January of 61, followed by Sword in the Stone in December of 63, and then let's not forget about Mary Poppins in 64. And speaking of new tech, What's fascinating about Mary Poppins, if you know where to look in that film, Walt found a way to shoehorn the newest technology that Disney had at that time, audio animatronics, into Mary Poppins. In fact, when you watch A Spoonful of Sugar, pay attention to the robin that flies over to Mary Poppins and lands on her finger. And, in fact, take a very close look at Julie Andrews' hand, which suddenly, that doesn't look like any hand a human being actually has, but they had to figure out how to make the animatronic robin fit on her hand. But that was successful enough that Walt actually slipped audio animatronics into the No-Mobile, which went out into theaters in July of 1967, and they used it sparingly in The Happiest Millionaire, which had come out the month previous, June of 1967, and would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Walt had lived beyond December of 1966, whether we would have seen even more animatronics used in Disney films and in bigger parts of them. But anyway, we'll talk further about other tech that Disney used in a sec. But before we do that, there's this.
You may think you know McDonald's drinks, but you don't know them like this. From fruity refreshers like the Strawberry Watermelon Refresher and the Mango Pineapple Refresher with popping boba, to crafted sodas like the Sprite Berry Blast with berry-flavored Sprite topped with cold foam. Who knew ice-cold drinks could be so fire? 6 all-new drinks are here. Try them all, now at McDonald's. Refreshers contain caffeine.
This spring, Uber Eats has you covered. Whether you're celebrating mom, dad, or your favorite grad, not all of us are great planners, and with the Uber Eats gift hub, you don't have to be. Send flowers, perfume, champagne, or just their favorite meal straight to their door. Gifts arrive in as little as 25 minutes, and you can add a personalized video message for that additional so-not-last-minute touch. So this spring, get a leg up on gift giving with Uber Eats. Last-minute gifts that land every time. Must be 21 or older to purchase alcohol. Product availability varies per region. See app for details.
And we're back. Okay, so we're continuing the tales of tech at the Disney company. And if we look back 30 years ago, Disney had suddenly become a very tech-obsessed company. Now, mind you, this is the Michael Eisner era, and Mr. Eisner is very interested in growing the company at this point. In fact, he's eyeballing buying a TV network. But what's kind of interesting is Michael initially went after CBS. In fact, he met with then CBS CEO Larry Tisch at Sun Valley. This is an annual thing where the moguls meet away from Hollywood and do business. This was July of 1995, and Tisch was interested, but to be honest, the talks didn't go anywhere. So Eisner then moves to his second choice, and he talks with Cap City's ABC head, Thomas Murphy. And kind of interesting, ABC was going to be twice as expensive to acquire as CBS, but on the other hand, ABC had ESPN, and that was very interesting to Michael Eisner. So, and Warren Buffett, by the way, is the one who effectively brokers the deal. So Disney announces its acquisition of ABC Cap Cities in August of 1995 for $19 billion. And, but what's interesting is right on the heels of this, November of 1995 is when Toy Story arrives in theaters. It's the first feature-length cartoon done in CG. And, and that makes money hand over fist. And, so as we head into Disney completing the deal for Cap Cities ABC, that's done in February of 96. So, Disney is in an acquiring mood, which brings us to an interesting little bend on this story. In December of 1996, Marvel Entertainment has to go into Chapter 11. At that point, Comic book sales were so miserable. Marvel was $700 million in debt, and price of shares in Marvel had gone from $35 in 1993 to just $2 in 1996. And Disney had the opportunity to pick up this comic book company for just pennies on the dollar. And Eisner's made aware of this opportunity, and he says no. And the interesting thing is Michael, at the time, just did not feel like Marvel, with its angsty comic book characters, would be a good fit for Disney. In fact, Eisner reportedly said, now, if it were DC Comics, that would be a different story. I mean, Mickey Mouse and Superman would be a great fit, but not Mickey Mouse and Spider-Man. And just to be fair, folks, we're still in December of 1996, some, 6 years away from the first Spider-Man movie. That wouldn't arrive in theaters till May of 2002. That's the one with Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi, and sort of showed the world, what a Marvel movie can actually be. And and then Disney winds up, some 7 years after that, paying $4 billion for Marvel Entertainment in August of 2009. So, hindsight is 2020. Anyway, at that point in the company's history, the biggest priority for Disney is renegotiating the company's original three-picture deal with Pixar, which had been signed back in July of 1991. February of 97, Disney announces that it now has a 10-year-long 5-picture deal with Pixar. By the way, Steve Jobs got much more favorable terms this time around. But, again, a lot of that was because computers were where it was at that point. At least, they were perceived as the future of entertainment. And in fact, again, this is 1997 we're talking about, folks. So, and this is the year where the World Wide Web has just gone past 1 million websites. In fact, at this time, there's 120 million people online cruising the internet. And just like it wanted to have a presence in network television, and again, that explains that $19 billion that Disney spent the year previous, 96, on Cap Cities and ABC, Disney is now eager to claim some space online. And the thinking in the Team Disney Burbank building is, well, let's just do what we did with ABC Cap Cities. Let's whip out our checkbook. Let's buy some already established entity online that will allow us to have a major web presence almost immediately. So Disney reps start sniffing around in late 1997, early 1998, and they eventually settle on InfoSeek, which is an early popular search engine. And June of 1998, Disney buys a 43% stake in InfoSeek for just $70 million, which, again, seems quite the bargain compared to the $19 billion for ABC Cap Cities. And ultimately, the goal here is to take InfoSeek and then merge it with the other online entities that Disney already has. And at this point, we've got ABC.com, we've got ESPN.com, not to mention Disney's own Buena Vista Internet Group. And then transform all of these websites into this one-stop shop, entertainment hub, a Disney-run place online that internet users just will not be able to resist. So all systems are go. In fact, that's what this internet portal that Disney was going to transform InfoSeek into was going to be called, go.com. Until things began to go very, very wrong. And we'll get to that part of the story on the second and final installment of this series, which will be featured on next week's episode of I Want That Too, which, by the way, is going to be the 100th episode of this podcast. But before we do that, let's bring Lauren back into today's show.
Okay, Jim, on that note, I think it's about time we close up shop here for today on episode 99.
There we go. And by the way, if you want to keep up on everything happening across the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, please follow us on social.
Yep. And if you got a question or an idea for a future episode, shoot us a message. We love to hear from you. Jim can be found at jim@jimhillmedia.com, and I'm at lauren@laurenhersey.com. Well, that does it for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on I Want That Too.